The time to start was 18 months ago. The second time to start is right now. If you wait till the last minute, it doesn't take just a minute. It still takes 12 to 18 months if you're starting from zero.
Welcome to Trust Issue by Demo, the podcast where we go beyond checkbox compliance and get real about security. In every episode, we will break down what's happening in the world of CMMC, cybersecurity, and GRC, straight from the people building, auditing, and living it. Real conversation about real security.
All right, welcome to Trust Issues. On today's episode, we're joined by Nicholas Bakewell, Director of Information Security at Acuris Aerospace Corporation and founder of Redwood Cyber Services. Nicholas leads the information security team for a multinational aerospace manufacturer operating in the defense industrial base, where compliance with DFARS, CMMC, and ITAR generally aren't optional. It's essential for staying in business. Alongside that role, he founded Redwood Cyber Services to help executive teams across the defense sector design practical, resilient, and cybersecurity programs. Today, we'll explore what CMMC compliance actually looks like from the inside, how organizations move from documentation to real security, and what it takes to build cybersecurity programs that can stand up to both audits and real-world threats. So welcome, Nicholas. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. I thought we'd just get started with what does Acuris Aerospace do and how long has it been in business for?
Yeah, absolutely. So Acuris Aerospace is a classic aerospace manufacturer in the defense industrial base. Been around for a couple of decades. Like a lot of these SMBs in the DIB, they have grown over the years through mergers and acquisitions, acquiring small mom and pop shops, adding capabilities, transitioning from civilian work into military and space work, kind of balancing that portfolio. So our military arm, the arm that we're more concerned about when in terms of DFARS and CMMC compliance, we do a lot of work for the major primes, Lockheed, Northrop, Boeing, that kind of stuff, and all sorts of programs that most people would be familiar with, just part of that supply chain.
Very cool. And these days, are you mostly military work, or are you sort of balancing, are you 50-50 civilian? Kind of what's the breakdown?
It's a fairly even balance between military, civilian, and space now.
Very cool. How'd you get into this space? How does one start working for a defense contractor?
So a little bit of a story, but it does have a common thread. I went to college way back in 2006 for computer science. I always had that bent on that side of the house. But I joined the Marine Corps, wanted to make a career out of military service, much like my family lineage. But I had an opportunity around 2015 in the Marine Corps. They sent me to Naval Postgraduate School to get a master's in information technology management. And I happened to get assigned a payback tour due to that degree as becoming an information system security manager at headquarters. So I got thrust into a cybersecurity heavy role that had to do with certification and accreditation of classified and unclassified networks. I did that role for a bit of time, obtaining some knowledge and certifications, and then had one of those life events where I got a medical diagnosis that prompted my exit from the Marine Corps, and I was looking for a new career, new job quite suddenly, and I was like, well, I enjoy this line of work. I'm going to kind of continue on in the civilian sector, and found a temporary job for a few years. And in early 2021, I was hired onto Farah Group, which was a company that was later acquired by Acuris, which is how I came to work for Acuris, as a person to lead them into CMMC compliance. Because early 2021, the rumblings were just really starting to begin, and some of the companies were thinking, whoa, what is this? And we need somebody to help talk us about it. So that was kind of a natural transition into more of the cybersecurity compliance side of the house from general IT operations and information assurance.
Super cool. At the time when you joined, was the company already on track for NIST 800, 171, or is it they truly hadn't done anything yet and you're really introducing them to all this?
Right. So, we put it in a polite manner. We say it's a greenfield environment, meaning there's nothing there but grass. Plenty of opportunity to build. I wish they knew, and that was part of the hiring discussion, saying, we've heard some rumblings, we've had some notes from our primes. We really don't know what this is. We need somebody to help guide us into building an information security program that is also going to be compliant for these upcoming requirements. What I had done in the Marine Corps as part of that certification and accreditation role is based off of a set of compliance documentation that is a superset of what CMMC is built off of. So my time as an ISSM was preparing me for what the other side of the house, the contractor side of the house, would have to now follow through CMMC.
You're the first director of IT that we've had on here that has their lead CCA certification. And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, basically there is a set of certifications that the cyber AB and kind of within the CMMC ecosystem, and lead CCA is basically the most challenging and like it's sort of like the final boss of all these certifications. Essentially what it stands for is like you are the lead CMMC certification auditor or assessor, maybe the word. And essentially, typically this certification is what the external auditor at the C3PAOs have. So it's really interesting to me that you're on the implementation side, or right, you're on the client side who also has the certification. Maybe just kind of tell us like, why didn't you just stop at registered practitioner like everybody else and decide to go get this?
It wasn't my original plan, but when we started preparing for CMMC some years ago, I had a lot of experience in 853 and 800-171, but anybody who's delved into those compliance frameworks before knows that there's a lot of interpretation, right? NIST defines a minimum standard agnostic of technology, and how you go about meeting that standard can be interpretive, right? And so as we were building this compliant network infrastructure, and as CMMC kept kind of getting delayed, and then we went into the Model 2 pause and all this stuff, I started thinking, well, I have more time. I know I'm going to eventually get assessed by people who may have different interpretations than I. It might be beneficial for me to get on a more even playing ground in terms of just kind of that perceived authority of, okay, you're saying maybe it doesn't meet the requirement. I'm arguing it does. You have a CCA or lead CCA. I'm a nobody. So, I'm not saying that the assessors would treat you as a nobody, but since I started to have the time with the delays of CMMC, I was like, well, let me get my CCP. Got my CCP, and I was like, that was good, but there's still a lot of questions I still have. I wonder if the CCA training will solve those questions. And I took the CCA training. It was good, but again, it's still interpretive, and more questions come. For every question that you feel like is solved, more questions pop up. I was like, well, now I just have to submit my lead CCA application. Why not? So it kind of started just as step by step, bolstering my ability to advocate for the company I work for that upcoming assessment, and just increase my overall knowledge, be exposed to differing views and different ways to achieve compliance.
It's very interesting because right now as a company, BMO, we are right now in the middle of our CMMC level 2 assessment, and I wish I was in your shoe because right now I have exactly the same, same feeling. So you give me something to shoot for.
Yeah, I feel like right now there's a little bit of surprise here and there of just like, oh wow, like this was not covered like in the training before, or there's a couple things that, as an RPO or even as like an implementer, like we weren't thinking about that is now coming up during like the mock audit, right? But very curious, I was under the impression that for CCA, you had to be working for an auditing firm as part of the requirements. Is that not true?
So that used to be true. Under the first model of CMMC, there was much more convoluted requirements of you had to be sponsored by C3PO, you had to left seat, right seat on 3 to 5 assessments, this and that. And that was done away with when they redid and released Model 2, probably for feasibility reasons and pipeline issues perhaps, but there's no longer, you have to have a resume validation, you have to have years of experience doing audits, but you don't have to,
It's not like I see you also have your CISP, and it's not like CISP where it's like you have to have the employer authenticate essentially that you've worked there for a number of years and that sort of thing, right?
Right. When you go through the application for CCP and CCA and then lead CCA, they will validate you submit your 8140 documentation, which would be, say, your CISP or your CISM or something. And just, having a valid CISSP obviously proves, they can just kind of inherit.
Inherently, yes, that was part of the prerequisite of the prior certification. So yeah. Cool. Well, what sort of what are some of the things that maybe you have found that are really helpful of having your CCA when having gone through your audit? Like, what is it that you were able to anticipate or prepare for like ahead of time?
Yeah, so one of the more surprising things I think probably is still a bit of a shrouded myth from people on the other side, people seeking an assessment is there's no one right answer. I think that's probably the stigma that you say, okay, these assessors, they go get trained and they'll train them. Okay, here's a requirement. Here's how you satisfy it. Here's a requirement. Here's how you satisfy it. You look for A, B, and C. And if they don't have A, B, or C, then it's not satisfied. But we have assessment objectives that say that the objective, the intent of A, B, and C have to be met, but there's no prescribed way to satisfy that. And so one of the things that really was illuminated to me as I was going through my CCA training and CCP training is that just the amount of assessor discretion that is indeed involved. And with that comes the amount of the importance on the narrative that the OSC presents to assessor. Because the assessor doesn't want to fail the OSC, but they need to be convinced that the objectives are being met. And it's not black and white. So the OSC can say, here is the objective, right? The documentation is public. The OSC should read it all, and say, okay, the objective is this. Here's how I'm meeting that objective. And they need to write the narrative in the SSP through the policy documentation, through the artifacts they present. And so it gives a level of leniency, not leniency in the sense that it can be less secure, but leniency in the fact that you have more of a capability than you think you have as an OSC of getting to the objective in a way that is still within your business processes. Some things are unavoidable. You need encryption in these areas where you need encryption, right? But a lot of areas, if you put in a little thought and effort, you can argue your case. But you have to be, capable of arguing your case in a way that the software is going to understand.
Right. It's kind of like, sure, you can be your own lawyer by going to court, but it's probably better being a lawyer yourself first. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure, a lot of these, organizations seeking certification would like to argue their case and go back and forth with the auditors. But if they don't have the certification, they don't have the language and the verbiage to be able to push back, then they're never going to have the opportunity in the first place.
Right. And that's part of why I do advocate personally that as companies, as OSCs who have a person responsible for getting them through compliance, I think it's absolutely beneficial to at least get the CCP, learn the lingo a bit, learn the environment a bit from the other side of the house.
That's amazing. Well, tell me more about Redwood. Like, what prompted you to start Redwood? What kind of work are you doing on the side for your clients?
Yeah, so Redwood, I started 6 or so years ago as just kind of I call it a weekend business, right? It's kind of low capacity, but at the time, CMMC was just really starting to gain traction in the industry, and there was a quick recognition that the DIB was not prepared.
You don't say.
To put it politely. And so I had multiple people reaching out to me for advice. Subject matter advice, interpretive advice, just kind of help them get pointed in the right direction. And so I figured, hey, there's an opportunity here. I'm in the field. I enjoy this field. And so that prompted me founding Redwood. And as you read in my business statement at the start of this podcast, I aim just to help executive teams in the defense industrial base understand what these requirements are and plan towards implementation. Because one of the first major hurdles I've noticed with CMMC is all the myths surrounding it. People are still referencing Model 1 and the 5 levels and different flight, and that's been gone for 3 years. Why do we still get supplier questionnaires saying, are you going to level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It's like, okay. Right. And so I used Redwood in the capacity of just helping really the smaller side of the SMBs in the defense industrial base kind of just get the wits about them.
So there's a lot of people I talk to so most of the people I'm talking to are in the defense and industrial base, and there's sort of like the gamut of people who are, wow, in my contracts, I'm going to for sure have to become CMMC level 2 compliant. So they're being proactive about doing it. But then we're finding that there's like, let's call it 60 to 70% of the people are saying, well, I don't know yet. I haven't seen any language yet. I'm not going to do anything about it yet. Why do you think there's such a huge gamut of some people preparing for it even though, November 1st is is basically already here in terms of implementation timeline. So like, why the huge range?
Two main reasons, I think. The first is cognitive bias. They don't want it to happen, and so they're looking for all the reasons for it not to happen. Well, my buddy said this. I have a guy who works in the DoD, and he said that. Oh, the next administration is just going to cancel it, whatever it may be. So there's certainly some of that wishful thinking going on. But the other reason is, historically, the DoD and the federal government at large has not done us any favors in the CMMC implementation, and for two main things. One, the whole debacle with CMMC. Model 1, the whole maturity model, it going, getting intense negative feedback, being withdrawn, going into silence for 18 months. A lot of people saw that as the death knell for CMMC and proof that it was never actually going to happen, despite what the DoD was saying at the time. But the second part, and specifically the confusion around, well, I don't think it's going to apply to me, is the fact that it all has to do with, do you have controlled unclassified information in your network? And for any of us involved in federal contracting, you say, is it clear what CUI you're being flowed down from your primes or from your KO? No, not clear at all. In fact, most of the time it's not marked, or it's marked just with, prime company-specific markings, or perhaps ITAR markings, but the FAR CUI rule has yet to be published in its final fashion. And so our ability as members of the defense industrial base, or really any member of the federal contracting base, once the FAR CUI rule gets published, to see, do I have CUI, is pretty limited. So my approach is kind of, is the obvious litmus test. You can look at your network and say, there's nothing marked as CUI coming into my network right now. That might be perfectly true. But if you ignore the fact that based off of looking at NAR CUI registry and looking at my contract and knowing what information is being passed to me, this will be marked as CUI in the near future. And you say, nope, I don't need certification. There's no CUI in my network. Technically true. The moment that flips, the FAR CUI rule is published, the primes get their act together, they pass you down a document with CUI marked on it, you are immediately non-compliant and cannot be touching that information. Do you want to play that game? I wouldn't.
I agree with you. I think I think where a lot of these contractors push back is, but it's expensive, right? Like, it's going to cost me, I don't know, let's say you're a 50-person company. It's going to cost me, I don't know, $200,000 a year between the external audit, the internal audit, the tools. Maybe I need to go buy a Prevail. Maybe I need to go migrate to like a GCC moderate or a GCC high environment, like all that stuff. I need to go get an MSP who needs to like help me with all that. Like, where's the money coming from, right? I feel like is the constant thing I'm hearing.
And that, the DoD has taken a pretty hard stance on where's the money coming from, because the DIB has kind of put itself in a particularly sticky situation with this line of complaints, because for those of us who are familiar with the industry, we know CMMC is just an assessment framework. It doesn't introduce new requirements, right?
You were supposed to be compliant.
You're supposed to be doing this via DFARS the whole time.
DFARS 7012, which was drafted and released in 2015 with an active date December 2017, said, do these 110 controls. And you self-attested to it. So the DoD says, well, the cost of implementation is in DFARS 7012. CMMC only has the cost of assessment. So are you saying you haven't implemented those controls, but you've been self-attesting to and getting contracts based off of self-attesting to? And the DIB says, I'm not saying that.
That's a big gotcha.
What if it costs anything other than the assessment cost? And the DIB saying, oh,
yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I think that's where everybody is it turns out that the DIB hasn't been doing it, or not anything, but there's a lot of people who haven't been doing anything, right?
So now I have a question for you. So there is about today only 1,000 companies who are CMMC able to certify, about 1,000. What will happen in November? Because the gap is too, I think for me, too big between how many still remain to become compliant, and there is no way,
The short answer is I'm not sure. However, let's also dispel some myths about November 1st, 2026. CMMC level 2 becomes phase 2 begins. Now that doesn't mean on November 1st, 2026, every single company that touches CUI has to be certified. It means that all contracts with the DoD that have CUI as part of what you get in the contract will have a level 2 requirement written into them. As a new contract, maybe as part of the contract mod cycle, if you're not bidding on a new contract at that moment, if you're not going through an option year extension or something like that, you're not necessarily going to have that requirement actually leveraged on you on November 1st. Now, who knows when it's going to come around? And the primes, from my experience, the primes aren't playing games. They've been very forceful. I've seen a lot of primes actually giving a June, July deadline to the supply base saying, show me your certificate by June and July, or the unwritten part of that is we're going to have to make, alternative measures for what you provide to us. There's going to be a disruption. There's certainly going to be a disruption come November, and the DoD is well aware of that. And then they've said before in some of their commentary that they do expect the DIB to downsize a bit, and they don't view that as a bad thing. And so for the 1,000 or so companies that have already been certified, and a lot of those companies are the service providers and MSPs, not necessarily OSCs, but some of it, like my particular company, some of us are the DIB contractors. There'll be opportunities for us in terms of just work available and pricing power and all that kind of stuff. So that's part of the executive sell too when pursuing CMMC is sometimes it pays to wait, sometimes it pays to be among the first adopters. And I think we're going to see that play out at the end of the year.
There's something that you said that I've been hearing a lot from prospects and that customers is that, hey, I do this very particular thing within the defense contractor ecosystem, and if I don't get my CMMC level 2 certification, the defense, the prime is not going to be able to go find many other people who can go do this thing and who can do this thing and are also CMMC certified. Do you think that that's like a valid argument for the contractor?
A valid argument to get
to say, hey, I don't really have to do much because they're not going to find anybody else who can do this anyway, and they're not just going to they're not going to find anybody else who can do the same thing who is also certified, so I'm not going to lose my business.
That's a good question because I'm not sure, because I know we do have some very niche areas in the defense world where there might only be 1 or 2 suppliers that do that. And if they cannot get certified, at what point do we live in a capitalist economy? At some point, there's always going to be hey, that's no longer a capability and the primes need it. Well, I'm going to pay the money to get a company certified and provide that capability. I'm going to charge to recoup my losses. So on some part, I think the DoD is relying on the fact that we're a capitalist society and it's going to adjust. The market will adjust to it.
I would second that. I have the same feeling as you.
Tell me more about what it's like to live in the post CMMC world. Like everybody, 99% of the planet is still like trying to get there in the first place, and you're in Hawaii just chilling on the other side. What is it like?
So I would love to say that it's incredibly relaxing and stress-free, but honestly, I rolled right into preparing for revision 3 of NIST 800-171 and the substantial gap between the controls that we found in revision 2 for CMMC and what we presume is going to be the next triennial cycle will most likely be assessing against revision 3. And there's some substantial differences there. But there is definitely a nice, I feel a little less like I'm playing whack-a-mole. In the months leading up to the assessment, it was always, let me re-review that. I could make that a little bit, but there was just, I had no excuse not to try to make every last little teeny adjustment. Yeah, so I was constantly just
my world. This is my world right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm very happy. I'm no longer, I have runway space now, right? There's nothing pressing on me as much as that impending assessment deadline was pressing on me. So yeah, I'm a little, people say my email is a little chipper.
Yeah. Oh, hey, that's amazing. I'm sure the experience is also works really well for Redwood, right? Where it's like, all right, I can speak a lot more, even more intelligently. First, I got my CCA. Now I've actually passed the I'm one of the very few that's passed the certification. It probably makes it like, I'm sure your clients are even happier because, wow, I get to talk to someone who's actually like on the other side, right?
Yeah, it definitely adds legitimacy, right? Experience brings that, and adds to my own confidence. We mentioned how it's so interpretive. And it is, and it's there for a reason because we have 100,000, maybe more, companies in the defense industrial base using all sorts of different technologies and processes and ways. It can't be prescriptive; it has to be interpretive. But having now some solid experience, both from the getting through an assessment, preparing, building, and being assessed, to also being trained to assess and advising and doing readiness assessments for companies. I've now taken both of those sides into one cohesive package, and makes me feel very confident about the information I can provide and the services I can provide. Still with that level of humility of it's a big world in the defense world, and I'm going to come across things I haven't seen before, but now I have a framework to kind of fall back on. Okay, let's take it back down to the objective. It doesn't matter I haven't seen this.
Stepping back, do you think that CMMC as a whole is good for is it good for the United States? Like, do you think that going through this and having all 100,000 companies go through this is going to make the defense industrial base more secure?
I definitely do, and I know there's a lot of talk about compliance does not equal security and this and that, and I think I think saying that kind of straight face is a pretty silly statement to make because it's always going to make your security better, but it doesn't mean it's going to meet your security objectives. We also have to remember that NIST 800-171 CMMC in its own documentation says these are the minimum standards that NIST has determined to meet only confidentiality. So if you are in issues, being the Director of Information Security, say, well, I need to do this, right? It's a compliance requirement, so I'm going to do it. But also I need to understand that that's the minimum standard only for compliance. I care about integrity and availability as well if I prescribe to the CIA triad. I also probably don't want to just meet the minimum. So I'm going to look at that compliance standard and say, this is a good basis. Because I have to, and a lot of smart people have gone and put it together. And there's been some great, and if you're an unbeliever, for those unbelievers out there about, well, the CMMC doesn't actually do this or that, there's been some very good presentations throughout the conference cycle over the years about mapping the particular controls in 800-171 to the MITRE attack framework, which is built off of observations of real attacks, mostly by the APTs, and saying how this control that shows up in the CMMC is tied to these portions of the attack framework, which is specifically geared towards mitigating these attacks from known examples, right? There's no reason not to be a believer, I'm saying, only if you stick in the ground.
I see from us of being a cybersecurity company, again, of course, nothing you can never say someone you are 100% sure you're secure, don't worry, no one can. But if all our clients were at the level of CMMC and can prove it, there will be a lot less cybersecurity attack, no doubt.
Yeah.
I look at it as like a figure of merit. It's your confidence value.
Exactly.
It's never going to be 100. It's asymptotic. It's never going to get to 100%, but it increases your level for sure.
Yeah. We often talk about how at the last Microsoft security conference that we went to, I believe one of the program managers that was there was saying that it was something like 41% of all Microsoft tenants worldwide don't even have MFA turned on for the global admin. So it's like, oh, well, if that's the bar, then sure, going after something like CMMC is going to make you way, way, way better. Also curious, I don't know, and again, you can kind of tell me this is out of bounds, but are you open to talking about kind of your technology strategy on how you achieve, from a technical controls perspective, did you end up going staying on I don't even know if you're on Microsoft, but did you end up doing the staying on the commercial version or going to the government versions of all your software?
Yeah, so I can talk to that for a bit. So my kind of the very beginning of my seed of thought in cybersecurity is that network complexity is the biggest threat to security, right? And so when I expand that out to, okay, what's my security stack? My overarching goal is reduce complexity and increase your performance with the tools you have. And so we are, like many companies, we live in the Microsoft ecosystem. We're multinational, we deal in arms, so most of what we deal with is under ITAR restrictions. So we exist in the GCC high environment, which has a lot of restrictions to it, obviously. But I chose, I looked at when I took over, and we had, as I mentioned, the company has grown through M&As throughout the years, and so one of the difficulties that I had to overcome was the fact that although we were one company under one umbrella, when you actually looked at the application, there was still kind of disparate companies using old technology that they've always used that doesn't interface and communicate. So one of the things I had to do was decide, okay, I'm going to homogenize everything in terms of the security structure. What do I want to go with? And the natural thought was, well, we already exist in the Microsoft ecosystem. Let me look at the Microsoft tools. And I compared it to some of the other ones. But what I found, and me personally, people may have differing opinions, is that the capabilities that Defender and Intune and Purview and conditional access through Entra have, they're good. And sure, you can find good capabilities in other tools as well, but because we're already a Microsoft ecosystem, and you got to up your licenses some to get some of these things, at least the way you want to get them. I built it around kind of that cohesive environment using cohesive tools that naturally talk to each other, which vendors hate because they've tried to sue Microsoft for antitrust and that. And I didn't do that because I'm sure there's valid, there's a valid.
It is valid.
But it works well for me, and being able to, because the problem is so many OSCs, and I've been in part of the OSCs that do this. They buy tools and they only ever learn how to use 10% of it. And you lose such a huge capability set. Like I'll give one particular example because I think it's such a powerful example with Defender. Like when you really learn Intune and Defender and Purview and data labeling and that kind of stuff, like you realize the capabilities these tools have and what you can solve with them, and you don't need other things, and you can automate processes. Like Defender has a baseline assessment capability where you can say, I'm going to select this device group, say, for example, all my servers, and I'm going to judge them against a security baseline. And for the example that I use, I'm going to say, hey, secure technical instruction got STIG Cat 1 for Windows Server 2022, 2025, whatever version it was. I'm going to judge all my servers against STIG Cat 1 items. Well, if we look at NIST 800-171 under configuration management, we say, hey, you need to define and prove a baseline. Well, shoot, I've almost already accomplished that control for all my servers on an automatic basis. I develop this baseline assessment template, I deploy it, I give it 24 hours, I look back at it, and it says, okay, here are all your servers that fail to meet, I think STIG Cat 1 has like 26 items in it. I remediate them, or I add them as enduring exceptions if they cannot be remediated. And now I've not only have I accomplished that compliance item, I can prove it anytime I want, just by going to the baseline assessment dashboard. The auditors love it. And this is one of the things that the C3PO actually, really, you make it easier to tell the story. The more confidence they have in you, the less they dig. That's a way of using technology that really makes it easy. I'm not trying to put up a spreadsheet. I'm not trying to say this or that. I'm just.
Your music to our ears, because it's exactly what we tell it by default. We are Microsoft Shop. We are Microsoft Partner of the Year. We are just Microsoft World, and we always said exactly the same thing of people come in and I have those 25 tools, and they're always like, wow, why do you spend that much money on the side? And the more tool you add, the more gap you create, the more patching you need.
Yeah.
And
more employees you need to manage those tools.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've implemented within our company that we found has been really helpful is so you take all the sources that go into Sentinel, and essentially you paired Sentinel with like a ticketing tool. So all of your events or the certain events that get reviewed by your SOC team then get visualized into Power BI. And then we've given the C3PO, as well as, we're also ISO and SOC 2, given them that Power BI in the mix of using like the GRC platform, the Microsoft ecosystem, as well as like the Power BI to visualize all that, makes it really easy. And I think, to your point, a lot of this is, hey, if the C3PO sees that you're a lead CCDA, they see that you are extremely organized and you have all this reporting within Microsoft and all that stuff. They say, wow, Nicholas clearly knows what he's doing. They're probably going to live a little bit more leniency, because they're like, all right, like this guy, like they're probably just thinking in their heads, wow, I wish all my customers that I was auditing was also like this, right?
Yeah. First impressions matter, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, great. Well, I don't want to hold you too much longer. I really appreciate, kind of everything that you've said here today. I think you're going to give a lot of directors of IT some thinking to do, to even go get their their more advanced certifications themselves within the ecosystem. Maybe one last thing before we go. What's sort of like the first thing that you think that if you're a director of IT looking into this for the first time, what are some things that as pieces of advice you'd give them?
I think the age-old adage of slow is smooth and smooth is fast really applies here. if you wait to the last minute, it doesn't take just a minute. It still takes, the full, 12 to 18 months if you're starting from zero, right? So, the time to start was 18 months ago. The second time to start is right now. But, don't look for that out of the box solution. I'll buy a Prevail enclave and realize, well, it's not actually an enclave. I still have endpoints and this and that. So, and you really hit this when you start to engage with a C3PO. So it warrants doing it yourself first. Is that scoping? Okay. Where is my CUI? Or well, will my CUI be if I'm still having these ambiguities about it being unmarked, and what will it be marked as? And again, the compliance requirement follows the data. And so the first thing you need to do is define and follow the data through your network to really understand, does this affect my whole network? Does it affect just a portion of my network? Can I easily take that portion and just kind of shove it over there and make this problem easier, or can I not? Right. And so doing a down-to-earth data discovery and data mapping exercise would be my basic kind of but do it anyways, because it turns out it's so piece of advice to people who are just getting started on this.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Glad to have you here, and we'll talk soon.
That is another episode of Trust Issue. In this conversation, help you think differently about compliance, security, or trust. Share it to help someone who is still stuck in a checkbox mode. Each week, we will keep bringing you more episodes, resources, and real-world insight from the BIMO team. Wherever you are listening from, don't forget to rate the podcast and follow us to stay up to date on the latest development in the GRC space. Remember, compliance gets you certified, but real security, that earns trust. Thank you for listening.